applications will soon be available at cgiu.org. I hope to see you there. Thank you again for all you do to build a better world for all of us and for generations to come.
All right, so one of our advisors, his name's John McArthur. He's incredible. Have we heard sort of Millennium Promise before? Yeah. Oh, wow. That's
right
a
on.
lot of hands. But to introduce John and to tell his stories is a good friend of mine who's really created a model that's really exciting in Canada. So he's just got a couple minutes, but I want you to really take in what he says and think about how you can apply it to your own work. So please welcome Bryan Turner.
Woo-hoo-hoo! Run, Bryan!
Thank you. I usually just extemporize and bring a blank piece of paper up here with me to the podium so it looks like I prepared, but I figure it's not every day that I get to introduce a personal hero, so I actually wrote some stuff down this time. You'll have to forgive me if I speak with supernatural rapidity. When I got told I got to talk about activism, I took 5 hours and wrote down about 7,500 words, which of course would never fit into 5 minutes, but so, that being said. I need your help, and I'll come back to why shortly. 2 years ago, instead of fundraising, students to end extreme poverty at Carleton University campaigned to get a question to referendum during student elections, where students had the opportunity to vote on whether or not they wanted to contribute an extra $6 in tuition fees to help support a Millennium Village. It worked. We got 73% of the vote. The 22,000 undergraduates at Carleton University now contribute over $100,000 annually to the Millennium Village project through Millennium Promise. The first part of the idea was proof of concept. We did that. The second part is replicating and scaling it. We don't have the resources to do that, though I suspect that together, all of us in this room can fix that. And the third part of the idea is using it as a tool for policy change. And that's what I would like to ask your help with. Our comparative advantage as a small organization is in pulling off wild ideas, many of which people say can't be done, proving the wild ideas can be done, and then figuring out how to bring them global. We chose to support Millennium Promise and the Millennium Villages because it offers the most effective approach for providing people with the basic tools they need to lift themselves out of extreme poverty. It's also the only approach that, if scaled, would see countless lives saved, an African green revolution, and amongst many another thing, every child in primary school. Scaling the Millennium Villages is also the only approach of which I am aware that falls within the globally endorsed 0.7% of rich world GDP in official development assistance, and can therefore be an advocacy tool to show what effective, transparent, monitorable, scientifically backed, community-led development assistance can accomplish, which, of course, is especially important given the scattered success record of aid up until the last decade or so. There are two ways to break a chain: a steady, gradual increase in tension, or a concentrated spurt of energy. Why not do both? The basic idea is by getting enough universities, businesses, faith groups, unions, and organizations to come together to support Millennium Villages through institutionalized giving, aside, of course, from helping a couple communities help themselves out of extreme poverty. It could raise enough awareness, get enough media attention, engage enough people, and foster enough cooperation, generate enough civil society will to see policy change. So, I'm in the midst of applying to grad school right now, and so that means a lot of personal statements, what I want to accomplish, how I want to impact the world, and all the rest of it. I've known for probably about a half decade now the outcomes that I'm aiming for, but I don't yet know the practical manifestations of that. But it got me thinking, not just about what I want to accomplish, but what that would look like. I'm going to be 42 or 43 in 2025, depending on the time of the year. And not that anyone can predict these things, but imagine maybe I'll have 2 kids, 5, 7, 10 years old, something like that. I imagine reading to them before they fall asleep about the state of the planet a decade or 2 hence. And I imagine them looking up with me with their big eyes in characteristic childlike innocence and saying, "But Daddy, why?" And I'd have to tell them lots of good people just didn't know what was going on in the world. And the people that did know didn't do what they could have done. But then, I get to tell them it's okay, and things aren't like that anymore. And then in a matter of 15 years, from 2010 to 2025, when very few people saw it coming, everything all of a sudden came together. And enough people started working together in the right way. Africa had a green revolution, and we got every child in primary school. We achieved gender parity. We stopped and reversed the spread of HIV, AIDS, TB, and malaria. And before you knew it, all these things that people were saying were so hard happened, and extreme poverty dropped from 1.4 billion in 2010 to under 200 million in 2025. There's not a lot of times when you can stand in a room with a bunch of people and say, you know, if we all just work together, we can really make a palpable difference on the macro policy level. But I can honestly say right now that if we all work together, we can stand advocacy and policy in this continent on its head. I know we all have our own interests to look after, but I'd like to urge you, as strongly as possible, to commit to doing all that you can to achieve the MDGs and to end poverty by 2025. This is our generation's great challenge. A good idea is a good idea. A life saved is a life saved. That is the spirit through which, in my own philosophical view, that we should be approaching all of our efforts. To purloin an aphorism from our speaker, whom I will introduce momentarily, commitment is making the big decision that means that you don't have to think about all the small ones. When the end of poverty arrives, as it can and should in our generation, as Jeff Sachs would say, I'm going to be able to look back and say that I did all that I could, that I mobilized my full effort. John McArthur is the paragon of someone who is mobilizing his full effort to achieve the Millennium Development Goals and to end poverty by 2025. For a decade now, alongside his close colleague Jeff Sachs, Dr. McArthur has been on the leading edge of action and policy on the Millennium Development Goals. John was one of the only people back in the early 2000s working on the challenges of AIDS, TB, and malaria. He has consistently held some of the highest level UN appointments around the Millennium Development Goals. He was manager of the UN Millennium Project, which, under Jeff Sachs and his own leadership, brought together over 250 world-leading experts in their respective fields and came up with a blueprint to cut global poverty in half by 2050. Alongside Jeff Sachs, he co-chaired the International Commission on Sustainable Development Education. He previously was policy director at the Earth Institute here at Columbia. He co-authored the Global Competitiveness Report with Jeff Sachs and Michael Porter. In other words, we're extremely lucky to have John here speaking. John may have done more for the Millennium Development Goals than any other person in the world. He's a tremendous inspiration. He's currently CEO of Millennium Promise, a prof at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs, a research associate at the Earth Institute, co-chair of the International Advisory Board on the effort to launch a global network of Masters of Development Practice programs, and, as previously noted, a really cool guy in a personal hero. If him and Jeff Sachs aren't splitting a Nobel Prize in 2015, the world is far more messed up than I thought, and I'm pretty jaded as is. On that note, it's with the utmost pleasure that I'd like to introduce Dr. John McArthur.
Thank you, Bryan. It's incredibly generous, maybe excessively generous. Really a pleasure to be here because this is the type of gathering